Welcome folks to our cabin. We want you to experience Alaska. Great pictures, how-tos, facts, and stories. So go ahead and grab a cup of espresso and enjoy. Hey there friends. Pull up a chair and get settled in. Today, we've got a real Alaskan story, one that's been passed down for generations. We hope you will enjoy it. Let us know what you think of the story. Write it down in the comments. What was your favorite part of the story? Tell us if there are other types of stories you'd like to hear.
All right, pull up a chair for a moment. Let me tell you a true Alaska story from back in January of 1886, when Juneau was still just a rough little frontier town on the edge of the world. A night folks talked about for years afterward, the night the Taku Winds came down. Juneau wasn't much back then, just a handful of wooden buildings along the shoreline, smoke rising straight up from chimneys, frost collecting on window frames. Most everybody worked the mines or supported those who did, and among them lived a quiet man named Henry Jacobs, hard-working, steady, and the kind who didn't say much unless he had a reason. His cabin sat a little ways from the harbour, small and sturdy, built from hand-cut cedar. On the morning of the storm, everything felt calm, colder than usual, but still. The kind of quiet where even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Henry spent the day stacking firewood, checking his tools and making sure the cabin stayed warm. Nothing seemed out of place, but the air had that strange, waiting feeling. Now, back in 1886, Juneau wasn't a big town, not even close. Fewer than 1,000 folks lived here, most of them packed into simple cabins held together with cedar, nails, and stubbornness. Those old cabins weren't airtight. Snow found every crack. If the wind turned against you, a warm room could drop to freezing in minutes. The people who lived here learned to respect the Taku Winds. They come roaring down off the glacier with the weight of the mountains behind them, cold and fast and furious. Old-timers said you could feel them before you heard them. The sudden stillness, the air turning heavy, and the snow beginning to drift straight upward, pulled toward the mountains instead of falling. That was the first sign. Late in the afternoon, Henry stepped outside and saw that strange sight for himself. Snow lifting off the ground in thin spirals. No breeze at all, just a slow pull toward the peaks above Juneau. He didn't panic. He fed the stove until it glowed bright, checked his shutters, sealed the cracks, and waited. The first blast hit just after nightfall. There wasn't any warm-up to it. No gentle wind before the storm, just a violent, explosive gust slamming into Juneau so hard it rattled every window in town. Snow blasted sideways, ice crystals stung the air. Henry's cabin shook so fiercely he had to steady his lantern to keep from dropping it. The sound wasn't a whistle, it wasn't a howl, it was a deep, tearing roar, like the mountains themselves had opened up. Cold, heavy air came crashing down from the glacier, and once it started, it never let up. By midnight, the storm was in full fury. Roofs peeled off in pieces. Planks skittered across the ground like dry leaves. A waterfront building got shoved clean off its foundation. A warehouse roof tore apart, sending lumber flying through the snow. Boats down in the harbour were beaten against the docks until several were wrecked. Inside his cabin, Henry fought his own battle. The wind forced bitter cold down his chimney, choking the fire. Sparks blew sideways inside the stove. Snow sifted through cracks like icy dust. The whole cabin trembled, the floor shuddering under Henry's boots as each gust slammed into the cedar walls. Then he heard a heavy banging outside, over and over again. It was his woodshed door. The wind had blown it open, exposing his whole winter's worth of firewood to the storm. If that wood scattered or got soaked, he wouldn't make it through the coming days. Henry tied a rope around his waist, fastened the other end to a beam inside the cabin, cracked the door just enough to slip out, and stepped into the fury. The moment he left the doorway, a blast nearly knocked him backward. Snow stung his face like needles. He had to crouch low just to move. Every step felt like pushing through a wall. The rope tightened behind him as he reached the shed. The door slammed wildly in the wind. He wrestled it closed, jammed a beam across it, and tied it off with numb fingers. He turned to head back, and a sudden gust hit him so hard it lifted his boots off the ground. He slammed into the snow, breath knocked out of him. For a moment he couldn't see anything except swirling white, but the rope held. That old cedar cabin tugged him home like a lifeline. Henry crawled, then staggered to his feet. Leaning into the wind with everything he had, he fought his way back to the door. When he finally slipped inside, he collapsed against the wall, shaking from cold and shock. But the firewood was safe, and the fire inside the stove, struggling but alive, still had a chance. The Taku Winds tore at Juneau all night long, hours of roaring wind, hours of ice flying like sand, the kind of storm that tests a man's cabin and a man's heart. Toward dawn, the storm stopped, not slowly, just suddenly quiet, like someone had thrown a blanket over the mountains. When Henry stepped outside, the sight was hard to believe. Cabins damaged, roofs torn apart, lumber thrown everywhere, the harbour filled with wreckage, a whole town reshaped in one night. But people began to emerge. Neighbours called out to one another. Folks checked cabins, repaired roofs, cleared paths, and helped one another through the damage. Juneau had been beaten, but the people weren't. By evening, lanterns glowed through frosted windows again. The wind was gone. The night was calm. And the town that held firm through the worst the Taku Winds could deliver finally rested. And that's the true story of January 1886, the night the Taku Winds came down over Juneau.
As always, folks, we are glad you stopped by our cabin. We look forward to seeing you again.